After taking the second break, we would like to continue completing our first session. Compliance helps management to find gaps in policy and operational procedures so they can improve or correct them as soon as possible. Boards, senior management, and department heads all have responsibilities and must be held accountable for how their teams perform. In addition, the policy details the duties associated with each role along the various project lines. But if the policy is not detailed enough, what should management staff do? Does the inadequate detail of the policy manual relieve management staff from responsibility for taking reasonable care to do the business? We will clarify that in our upcoming example. The job description has to specify the expected level of responsibility. An authorized manager and employee need to sign the job description. It is not necessary to detail the details of the duties, but the job description should be detailed to cover the reasonable duties required for the specific position. For example, the job description of an accountant states that 1. Accountant should check the validity of the payment per policy. 2. Accountant should obtain the authorization for payment per policy. 3. Accountant should accurately record the valid transactions into financial records per the RINSA policy, GAAP, or accounting standards. Those are reasonable duties specified in the job description. Yet the contents of ordinary care for performing those reasonable duties include the following. 1. The accountant should perform three-way matching before processing payments and recording transactions in financials, even if it is not mentioned in the job description or financial policy and procedures manual. Three-way matching is comparing prices between the contract or PO and invoice and comparing quantities between the goods receipt note, invoice and PO. 2. Accountant should check the arithmetical calculation of the invoice, PO and goods receipt note because it is ordinary care for payment even if it is mentioned neither in the job description nor in the policy and procedure manual. 3. Accountant should prepare payment vouchers and sign them per the requirements of the policy and procedure manual. 4. Accountant should inquire about discrepancies and pay the owed amount or reject the invoice to receive the correct invoice from the supplier per the policy of the organization. If there is no policy or procedure manual to guide the accountant, what should he or she do? The accountant should take reasonable and consistent action on such issues and document the reason for taking such action. 5. Accountant should obtain authorized manager approval for the payment per the requirements of the policy. And the accountant should attach the supporting documents to the payment voucher when presenting them to the authorized manager for approval and for archiving. Even if it is not required by policy and procedure manual or job description, payment voucher should be attached with supporting documents to be presented to the authorized manager for approval and to be archived with the payment voucher. 6. And finally, the accountant should record the transactions accurately per the requirements of financial policy. Therefore, if accounting preparation based on cash basis, accountant record the transactions accurately after releasing the payment to supplier. But if the accounting records are prepared on an accrual basis, the accountant should record the transaction when the goods received note is properly prepared for goods that are authorized to be ordered from the supplier. All those elements of accounting activities may not be specified in the job description because they are reasonably realized and understood by any person who has basic knowledge of accounting or has an undergraduate diploma in accounting. And ignorance of such basic information and skills by the accountant might escalate the risk of gross negligence and record invalid transactions or for unauthorized procurements or duplicate the payment. But, if the accountant receives an invoice from the supplier for delivering the goods to the warehouse or the site, and the materials receipt note was not signed by warehouse keeper or authorized person on site, and the purchase requisition and purchase order were not approved by authorized individuals in management, should the accountant record such a transaction? If it is recorded, what could happen? What is the compliance role in this scenario? Compliance officer may request an accountant to ensure that whether the individual who signed those documents was properly delegated by the authorized person and that delegation was at the appropriate level of management. If so, compliance can advise the accountant to record such a transaction. But if not, compliance may advise the accountant to not pay the invoice or accrue the receipt of the goods that could not be verified, who request, order and receive such items. Compliance may advise the accountant to accept such documents and record the transaction after taking subsequent formal approval from authorized individuals for this transaction. But compliance should consider the consequences of such practices in the future and how this practice can increase the risks and how to avoid or mitigate such risks to an acceptable level. Compliance is important for managers at all levels. Managers should be cautious when recruiting new individuals for specific positions or handing off responsibility to their work team. Because the manager is accountable in front of the senior manager. And the senior manager is accountable to board members who are accountable to external stakeholders. Therefore, the manager will be accountable for the work of their subordinates. If the subordinate makes a mistake during his work due to the lack of experience and skills of the employee, and a lack of appropriate supervision by his manager, the manager will take the responsibility for such a mistake. Therefore, the transparent documentation of reasonable diligence and care exercised for a decision or a process is required because it is part of proving the good faith of all levels of management. And such accountability generates contractual and legal liabilities. And in our example for the previous accountant, the contractual liabilities are stated in the contract and assigned job description, and other legal liabilities are required by law. The civil code of any country in the world defines gross negligence, a degree of negligence representing an extreme departure from the ordinary standard of care. Therefore, any individual, such as our previous accountant, should conduct the work within an ordinary standard of care even if such standards are not stated in a contract or job description or policy. But it can be done by any person who has basic knowledge and skill in accounting or has an undergraduate diploma in accounting. If a contractor claimed further significant payment due to an organization's employee who performed his duty in the wrong way and interfered to stop completing contractual tasks during a stage of performance of the contract, other employees in the organization, an auditor or tax inspector, will normally ask how the organization can know the truth of the claim, accurate amount of the contractor's claim. What are the consequences of not paying further payment based on the contractor's claim? A monitoring mechanism over the performance of a contractor is supposed to be established as written internal controls for responsible departments, or stated as duties in job descriptions for different positions in an organization. Also, those monitoring mechanisms should be directly or indirectly stated in a contract. Accordingly, it gives the right to notify the contractor about unsatisfactory performance formally and to set a formal basis for communication between the organization and the contractor. A contract should give the right to notify the contractor to stop the work at any stage if there is significant risk or unsatisfactory performance. If the contractor ignores the notification and continues the work, the contractor will take sole responsibility for the completion of the work. Before contract signing between the organization and contractor, the organization should ensure if the communication tools stated in the contract comply with the criteria of proof. The contractual monitoring mechanism that organization will apply to monitor contractors' activities should be adequately described and brief. To avoid loophole in contract, enable the contractor to easily avoid his/her responsibility. Therefore, compliance played a role in identifying contract risks and finding practical solutions for preventing and detecting such risks and finding corrective procedures, if it is required. Simply, the compliance is a monitoring process for an organization. But boards and senior management should identify the scope of compliance that is required to mitigate the predetermined potential risks. Compliance scope creates a framework for compliance activities and may push management to have a compliance department or to combine compliance activities with other functional activities. For example, if an organization signed a one-year employment contract with somebody starting from Jan 1, 2021 to December 31, 2021. And the employment contract contains a clause that gives the organization the right to cancel the contract at any time during the probationary period of 3 months without prior notice. And the probationary period will start from Jan 1, 2021. But if the employee worked for 2 weeks, then he has been sick for 2 weeks. And his sickness can continue to exceed 2.5 months. Many labor laws worldwide does not give full rights to probationary period employee and may not allow to dismiss or end employment service during holiday, sick leave, weekend, or annual leave. What should management do in such a case when an employee is under probationary period and on sick leave at the same time? If sick leave extended beyond the end of probationary period, the probationary period would not extend but based on year-end contract. The contract will be valid for remaining year of contract period. The HR manager who thinks based on compliance approach feels afraid that the end of contract during the sick leave period of employee may lead to legal claim for violating the labor law. What the best action toward this issue? And not terminating the employee during the probationary period will make the contract valid for the remaining period end date of the probationary period to the end of the contract. What are the best practices for avoiding or mitigating a risk? Although the employee who is in a probationary period may not be protected by some laws, compliance needs to be ensured if the employee is very sick, as he or she cannot come and perform the reasonable duties with slight diligence and care. In order to prove the good faith of management in terminating the contract or having new and acceptable agreed terms, compliance may ask HR to request the employee to attend the office to partially prove the capability to do some tasks, to discuss the matter of his sickness, and to observe the employee's abilities and perception for several hours. Then management may need to discuss his capability to work part-time or full-time while exercising the minimum diligence, skills, and care to perform the required reasonable duties. If both parties accept the new terms, they can sign an amendment to the contract. Otherwise, management should immediately prepare 1 week's prior notice for terminating the contract in the attendance of some staff. Also, we confirm that management should pay attention to any circumstances that could increase the likelihood of considering the termination of the probationary period as unfair. In the case of the employee refusing to attend due to his physical illness, since the nature of the work requires him to have physical fitness and time has passed without verifying the appropriateness of the employee and there are many tasks that have been pending for a long time, the organization still has the right to terminate the contract at any time as long as the employee is under probationary. Although, organization has the right to terminate the contract within the probation period of the employee, compliance may advise the management to pay attention to being professional, presenting the good faith and considering the circumstances of paying compensation for unfair dismissal to the employee who is under probationary period. Therefore, management may give the employee 1 week notice through an independent person and reasonably justify the dismissal without referring to the risk of sickness or any irrelevant reasons. Several management positions should keep paying attention to the legal dimensions of their decisions during contract employment. Even if the employee is under a probationary period, management should prove their reasonable skills, diligence, and care when they take any decision. Silent management and paying wages for long sick leave during a probationary period can be interpreted as previous awareness and acceptance of management regarding the health conditions of the employee during a probationary period, especially after requesting and receiving a medical report. Paying an amount for a long period without receiving any service from that employee may not be accepted by shareholders or donors, especially if the amount is significant or this issue has become more frequent. Also, not taking quick action to terminate a contract after 3 weeks of sickness, and such issues frequently occur, can be considered as misconduct due to gross negligence. Management should pay attention to labor law and not include clause of probationary period in the employment contract which its work period is equal to or less than 6 months. Because the shorter work period is required, the more skilled worker is needed, and the more care and diligence should be exercised to hire the competent worker. Also, there are some labor laws in wide does not allow employee to be under probationary period more than once for the same nature of work even if the contract law mentioned more than probationary period. However, Some labor law does not prevent labor from such practice and leave it to employment contract if employment contract that is agreed by both parties requires employees to be subject to more than twice probation period or more. The employment contract should be prevailed in absence of requirements of labor law or other prevailed laws. Moreover, management should consider all other relevant laws that can be affected by different scenarios of management and employee relationships, such as employment contracts, income tax law, social security law, and internal policies and regulations. Civil law if labor law does not cover specific matters, mission, and strategies. Finally, we can understand that management should identify several and interdependent compliance risks, such as 1. Compliance risk of violation of laws and regulations of host countries and country where head office of organization is incorporated. 2. Compliance risk of violation of donors' requirements. 3. Compliance risk of not achieving mission, strategic and short-term goals and not meeting values of organizations. 4. Compliance risk of not performing contractual terms. At the end of this orientation, you obtain general information of how compliance is important for organizations, and we briefly explained the few guidelines for specific cases or scenarios that help organizations to comply with several required criteria such as regulation standards, Rule identify consequences of compliance and legal risks, provide evidence for proving the reasonable and minimum care of duties for avoiding or mitigating legal and compliance risks, prove the good faith of management decisions through transparent and honest process and how they exercise reasonable skills, diligence and care for avoiding or mitigating potential risks. You might be still confused between compliance review or compliance audit and other audits and reviews such as external financial audit, third-party evaluation, internal audit. In Session 2, we will briefly explain to you the main differences between financial audits, internal audit and compliance, and you will know how compliance can be part of such audit types. Thank you for watching and listening to the first session of Compliance Orientation. I hope it was useful for you to generally understand the compliance concept. Thank you again. And see you in Session 2 of our presentation of the general compliance concept. Good luck.